All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to talk about Nathaniel Hawthorne's Young Goodman Brown. It's a very weird but fun short story. Um, Pretty representative of his work here. I'm going to go ahead and have us look at the study guide before we begin. So, earlier this week with the intro to Unit 2, we defined romanticism, sort of a movement that focuses on beauty, nature, feelings, emotions, imagination in art. The Gothic, which is a sub-movement, focuses on the darker emotions, fear, helplessness, dark or supernatural settings and creatures, things of that nature. Pretty big in Europe, and then came over to America around this time. Three biggest names we'll be focusing on are Nathaniel Hawthorne, Washington Irving, a little, and Edgar Allan Poe, of course. Today's reading, Young Goodman Brown, fits the term allegory. Allegory is a story where everything stands for something else. Sometimes it's very blatant or on the nose, like if you have a character named Strength, who represents strength, a character named Greed, who represents greed. Sometimes it's very on the nose like that. Other times it's a little more subtle, but in an allegory, everything represents something else. And in Young Goodman Brown, our main character is a young, good man named Brown. It's pretty straightforward. His wife, Faith, represents his faith. So it's very blatant again. That's what allegories do. And some of the other questions you want to keep in mind as we go along is where this takes place. So I believe the Salem area again. Conflict, chief characters, things like that. You want to notice what happens to his wife, Faith, because that's telling us what's happening to his internal faith along the course of his journey. Question 8. This is sort of a magical and religious journey, but one of the books in literature most famous for that is actually the Divine Comedy, especially the first book, Inferno, by Dante Alighieri. Lots of books since then have been famous for the supernatural, spiritual journey form of writing, but this is another example of that. Other things to pay attention to: what does the main character learn about the people in his life? Because he meets various people from his life along the way, much like what happens in the Divine Comedy. And you want to try to think about who is the old man of the story, because he's very suspicious and creepy, but there's a reason for that. And how might his appearance might be significant. So things to keep in mind. I'm going to go ahead and switch what I'm presenting to the book itself. And we're going to go ahead and go through that together. Young Goodman Brown came forth at sunset into the street of Salem Village. Now, opening lines in stories are always important. So, sunset, the closing of the day, the things are growing dark, gloomy, ominous. And Salem, of course, already has that reputation from the witch trials, as we read in The Crucible, has that reputation for witchcraft, true or not. That's what people think of when they think of Salem. So Nathaniel Hawthorne's choosing that setting on purpose. He wants us to be thinking about maybe witchy things are going on here, maybe not, something. All right, but he put his head back after crossing the threshold to exchange a parting kiss with his young wife. And Faith, as the wife was aptly named, thrust her own pretty head into the street, letting the wind play with the pink ribbons of her cap while she called to Goodman Brown. "Dearest heart," whispered she, softly and rather sadly, when her lips were close to his ear, "prithee put off your journey until sunrise, and sleep in your own bed tonight. A lone woman is troubled with such dreams and such thoughts that she's afeard of herself sometimes. Pray tarry with me this night, dear husband, of all nights in the year. So Faith is concerned for him taking this journey, whatever journey it is or why he has to do it, we don't know. But if his faith is worried for him taking this journey, maybe this journey will be detrimental to his faith. It's kind of a symbolic thing going on. My love and my faith, replied young Goodman Brown, of all nights in the year, this one night I must tarry away from thee. My journey, as thou callest it, forth and back again, must needs be done twixt now and sunrise. What, my sweet, pretty wife, dost thou doubt me already? And we but 3 months married. So it's interesting. He's only been with his faith for 3 months. It's kind of a young faith, one might say. It's not an old faith or like a faith he was born with and raised with, only for 3 months. So perhaps it's still not firmly rooted, this faith of his. Could be swayed very easily by seeing unsettling things. Then God bless you, said Faith, with the pink ribbons, and may you find all well when you come back. Not ominous there at all, the foreshadowing. Not at all. Amen, cried Goodman Brown. Say thy prayers, dear Faith, and go to bed at dusk, and no harm will come to thee. So they parted, and the young man pursued his way until, being about to turn the corner by the meeting house, he looked back and saw the head of Faith still peeping after him, with a melancholy air in spite of her pink ribbons. Poor little Faith, thought he, for his heart smote him. What a wretch am I, to leave her on such an errand. She talks of dreams, too. Methought, as she spoke, there was trouble in her face, as if a dream had warned her what work is to be done tonight. But no, would kill her to think of it. Well, she's a blessed angel on earth, and after this one night I'll cling to her skirts and follow her to heaven. So, weird conversation to have with himself, like he's saying, okay, I'll be good in terms of my religion, my faith, after tonight and for the rest of my life. I just got to go do this one thing that's kind of suspect for his faith, and after that I'll be good. It's always a tenuous thing to say. Kind of troubling. With this excellent resolve for the future, Goodman Brown felt himself justified in making more haste on his present evil purpose. He had taken a dreary road, darkened by all the gloomiest trees of the forest, which barely stood aside to let the narrow path creep through, and closed immediately behind. It was all as lonely as he could be, and there is this peculiarity in such a solitude, that the traveler knows not who may be concealed by the innumerable trunks and the thick boughs overhead, so that with lonely footsteps he may yet be passing through an unseen multitude. There may be a devilish Indian behind every tree, said Goodman Brown to himself, and he glanced fearfully behind him as he added, what if the devil himself should be at my very elbow? Now notice the word choice here, because you see back then Puritans and the like basically equated any pagan religions, any religions that weren't theirs, like the Native American religions, with the devil. So they just made it all the same. Witchcraft, Native American religions, that's all the devil, it's all the same thing. That's what they would have thought. Hence that paragraph right there. Yeah. His head being turned back, he passed a crook of the road, and, looking forward again, beheld the figure of a man, in grave and decent attire, seated at the foot of an old tree. He rose at Goodman Brown's approach, and walked onward side by side with him. You are late, Goodman Brown, said he. The clock of the Old South was striking as I came through Boston, and that is full 15 minutes agone. Faith kept me back a while, replied the young man, with a tremor in his voice caused by the sudden appearance of his companion, though not wholly unexpected. One thing to note here, since you have read The Crucible already in this class, is when they spoke of meeting a man in the forest, what man were they talking about? They always asked the girls, did you meet this man in the forest? Did you sign his book? Who were they talking about? Think about that as you think about this guy, Goodman Brown's guide in the dark forest. And notice, of course, his faith kept him from this journey for a little while. So His faith doesn't want him to go on this journey. Maybe it's a bad journey, morally or religiously speaking. It was now deep dusk in the forest, and deepest in that part where it was these two were journeying. As nearly as could be discerned, the second traveler was about 50 years old, apparently in the same rank of life as Goodman Brown, and bearing a considerable resemblance to him, though perhaps more in expression than features. Still, they might have been taken for father and son, and yet though the elder person was as simply clad as the younger, and as simple in manner too, he had an indescribable air of one who knew the world, and who would not have felt abashed at the governor's dinner table or at King William's court, were it possible that his affairs should call him thither. But the only thing about him that could be fixed upon as remarkable was his staff, which bore the likeness of a great black snake, so curiously wrought that it might almost be seen to twist and wriggle itself like a living serpent. This, of course, must have been an ocular deception assisted by the uncertain light. So now you're getting more clues as to who the old guy is. He carries a serpent staff. That's never creepy, but what Christian religious figure is associated with serpents? They're kind of hitting you over the head with this one, but I'll give you some time on that. "Come, Goodman Brown," cried his fellow traveler. "This is a dull place for the beginning of a journey. Take my staff if you are so soon weary." "Friend," said the other, exchanging his slow pace for a full stop, "having kept covenant by meeting thee here, it is my purpose now to return whence I came. I have scruples touching the matter thou wottest of." "Sayest thou so?" replied he of the serpent, smiling apart. "Let us walk on, nevertheless, reasoning as we go. And if I convince thee not, thou shalt turn back. But we are but a little ways in the forest yet." Notice the figure is tempting him to go on when he has doubts, tempting him to go further into the forest with him, to walk with him a bit more yet. They haven't been too far yet. Temptation is a thing here. Too far, claimed the good man, unconsciously resuming his walk. My father never went into the woods on such an errand, nor his father before him. We have been a race of honest men and good Christians since the days of the martyrs. And shall I be the first of the name of Brown that ever took this path and kept? Such company, thou wouldst say, observed the elder person, interpreting his pause. Well said, Goodman Brown. I have been as well acquainted with your family as with ever a one among the Puritans, and that's no trifle to say. I helped your grandfather, the constable, when he lashed the Quaker woman so smartly through the streets of Salem, and it was I that brought your father a pitch pine knot, kindled at my own hearth, to set fire to an Indian village. In King Philip's War, they were my good friends both, and many a pleasant walk have we had along this path, and returned merrily after midnight. I would fain be friends with you for their sake. All right, so you might have figured out by now that the old guy is totally Satan. He is definitely the devil. And so he's trying to shake Goodman Brown by saying, oh, you think your family's good. I knew all your family, man. I knew your father. I knew your grandfather. Helped him out with some really evil, awful stuff. So they're not as good as you think. And that'd be kind of troubling to find out, I imagine. Let's see how Goodman Brown takes it. Seems to take it pretty well, actually. If it be as thou sayest, replied Goodman Brown, I marvel they never spoke of these matters, or verily I marvel not, seeing that the least rumor of the sort would have driven them out from New England. We are a people of prayer and good works to boot, and abide no such wickedness. Wickedness or not, said the traveler with the twisted staff, I have a very general acquaintance here in New England. The deacons of many a church have drunk the communion wine with me. The select men of diverse towns make me their chairman, and a majority of the great and general court are firm supporters of my interest. The governor and I too, but these are state secrets. So we said, yeah, there's a lot more people sinning than you think, young Goodman Brown. Not every, because he apparently believes everyone's totally a good person. especially the people in his life. "Can this be so?" cried Goodman Brown, with a stare of amazement at his undisturbed companion. "Howbeit, I have nothing to do with the governor and council. They have their own ways, and are no rule for a simple husbandman like me. But were I to go on with thee, how should I meet the eye of that good old man, our minister, at Salem village? Oh, his voice would make me tremble both Sabbath day and lecture day." So now that he's found out his family's not so great and people in general, he's going to find out more about other specific people in his life. He just mentioned his minister. Thus far, the elder traveler had listened with due gravity, but now burst into a fit of irrepressible mirth, shaking himself so violently that his snake-like staff actually seemed to wriggle in sympathy. "Ha ha ha," shouted he again and again. Then composing himself, "Well, go on, Goodman Brown, go on, but prithee, don't kill me with laughing." "Well, then, to end the matter at once," said Goodman Brown, considerably nettled, "there is my wife, Faith. It would break her dear little heart, and I'd rather break my own. Troubled about breaking with his faith, of course, by walking with this weird guy." "Nay, if that be the case," answered the other, "even go thy ways, Goodman Brown. I would not for 20 old women like the one hobbling before us that Faith should come to any harm." One thing you might want to note with this character here, who is apparently Satan, he might be lying because he's Satan, you know, and the whole serpent association with both the devil and lying. You never know what to trust when he's saying in the story, and it might be that you shouldn't trust him at all. Maybe Goodman Brown shouldn't have trusted him or walked with him. But he's doing both, so we'll see what happens. As he spoke, he pointed his staff at a female figure on the path, in whom Goodman Brown recognized a very pious and exemplary dame who had taught him his catechism in youth. That is the Catholic Sunday school. So this is the lady that taught him his Sunday school when he was a kid, and was still his moral and spiritual advisor, jointly with the minister and Deacon Gookin, which is a weird name. No one, don't name your children Gookin. Or do, and it'll be very funny for everyone except that child named Gookin. If any of your family's named Gookin, I apologize for that. That was a bad joke. A marvel truly that Goody Cloyce should be so far in the wilderness at nightfall, said he. But with your leave, friend, I shall take a cut through the woods until we have left this Christian woman behind. Being a stranger to you, she might ask whom I was consorting with, and whither I was going. So he's embarrassed for this figure in his life, this role model in his life, to see him walking with Satan. That's kind of a bad thing to be seen doing. "Be it so," said his fellow traveler, "betake you to the woods, and let me keep the path." Accordingly, the young man turned aside, but took care to watch his companion, who advanced softly along the road until he had come within a staff's length of the old dame. So Goodman Brown's walking parallel to the path, and apparently he can see and hear Satan and the old lady, but they can't see him. Kind of convenient. She, meanwhile, was making the best of her way with singular speed for so aged a woman, and mumbling some indistinct words of prayer, doubtless, as she went. The traveler put forth his staff and touched her withered neck with what seemed the serpent's tail. "The devil!" screamed the pious old lady. Just in case you still weren't sure, he's the devil. "Then Goody Cloyce knows her old friend," observed the traveler, confronting her and leaning on his writhing stick. "Ah, forsooth, and it is your worship indeed," cried the good dame. So she admits to knowing him and being friends with him. That's not good. But again, can we trust anything Satan's saying or showing Goodman Brown on this? Sure, because it's Satan. "Yea, truly it is it, and in the very image of my old gossip, Goodman Brown, the grandfather of the silly fellow that now is. But would your worship believe it, my broomstick hath strangely disappeared, stolen, because witches fly on brooms, as I suspect, by that unhanged witch, Goody Cory, and that too when I was all anointed with the juice of smallage and cinquefoil and wolfsbane. Mingled with fine wheat and the fat of a newborn babe, said the shape of old Goodman Brown, so the devil, which looks like old Brown for some reason. And that's not creepy at all, fat of a new. So that means they sacrificed a child for their witchcraft. Just in case you weren't sure if they were evil or not. Ah, your worship knows the recipe, cried the old lady, cackling aloud. So, as I was saying, being all ready for the meeting that no horse to ride on, I made up my mind to foot it. For they tell me there is a nice young man to be taken into communion tonight. But now your good worship will lend me your arm, and we shall be there in a twinkling. So that's some foreshadowing, too. Not only has he tarnished the memory of this guy's Sunday school teacher, but she's saying, I hear some nice young man's going to join us tonight, take our communion, which is not the church communion, it's the dark witchy communion, and become one of them, basically side with Satan. She hears that, so maybe that's some foreshadowing. I don't know. Maybe it's not. Maybe that's the devil tricking him again. Maybe it's, anyway. That could hardly be, answered her friend. I may not spare you my arm, Goody Cloyce, but here is my staff, if you will. So saying, he threw it down at her feet, where perhaps it assumed life, being one of the rods which its owners had formerly lent to the Egyptian magi. You might, if you've ever read the book of Exodus from the Bible, remember the story with the Egyptian guys with these staffs that became snakes. And Moses, the staff, became a snake and ate the other snakes. And it was kind of a competition between their powers and God. And it's referencing that. That is a allusion with an A. Allusion, a reference to the book of Exodus. Of this fact, however, Goodman Brown could not take cognizance. He had cast up his eyes in astonishment, and looking down again beheld neither Goody Cloyce nor the serpentine staff, but his fellow traveler alone, who waited for him as calmly as if nothing had happened. So, yeah, the old lady and the staff are just poof, gone, so that's normal. That old woman taught me my catechism, said the young man. And there was a world of meaning in this simple statement, meaning his faith, the inner faith, is getting a bit shaken by this. Seeing such good people turn out not to be good people, maybe, if we can trust Satan. They continued to walk onward while the elder traveler exhorted his companion to make good speed and persevere in the path, discoursing so aptly that his arguments seemed rather to spring up in the bosom of his auditor than to be suggested by himself. As they went, he plucked a branch of maple to serve for a walking stick, and began to strip the twigs and little boughs which were wet with evening dew. So not only does the Satan guy look like an older version of him, but young Goodman Brown is getting a walking stick of his own, kind of resembling the old man more with his staff. It's not a snake, but some parallels there. The moment his fingers touched them, they became strangely withered and dried up, as with a week's sunshine. Thus the pair proceeded at a good free pace, until suddenly, in a gloomy hollow of the road, Goodman Brown sat himself down on a stump of a tree and refused to go any farther. So he's resisting going with Satan a little more at this point. Friend, said he stubbornly, my mind is made up. Not another step will I budge on this errand. What if a wretched old woman do choose to go to the devil when I thought she was going to heaven? Is that any reason why I should quit my dear faith and go after her? So he's seen some things. He's kind of depressed about it, but he's like, I still like my faith, though. I don't know about this, Mr. Satan. Don't know about that. Still like my faith. His wife, but also his faith, because allegory. You will think better of this by and by, said his acquaintance composedly. Sit here and rest yourself a while, and when you feel like moving again, there is my staff to help you along. Without more words, he threw his companion the maple stick, and was as speedily out of sight as if he had vanished into the deepening gloom. The young man sat a few moments by the roadside, applauding himself greatly, and thinking with how clear a conscience he should meet the minister in the morning, nor shrink from the eye of good old Deacon Gookin. And what calm sleep would be his that very night, which was to have been spent so wickedly, but so purely and sweetly now in the arms of faith, Amidst these pleasant and praiseworthy meditations, Goodman Brown heard the tramp of horses along the road and deemed it advisable to conceal himself within the verge of the forest, conscious of the guilty purpose that had brought him thither, though now so happily turned from it. So he believes he's out of the woods at this point, but Devil's still going to try to rope him back into walking with him. Of course, he's not done yet. No fiddle competitions, unfortunately. That would have been nice. On came the hoof tramps and the voices of riders, two grave old voices conversing soberly as they drew near. These mingled sounds appeared to pass along the road within a few yards of the young man's hiding place. But owing doubtless to the depths of the gloom at that particular spot, neither the travelers nor their steeds were visible, though their figures brushed the small boughs by the wayside. It could not be seen that they intercepted, even for a moment, the faint gleam from the strip of bright sky athwart which they must have passed. Goodman Brown alternatively crouched and stood on tiptoe, pulling aside the branches and thrusting forth his head as far as he durst without discerning so much as a shadow. It vexed him the more because he could have sworn, were such a thing possible, that he recognized the voices of the minister and Deacon Gookin, jogging along quietly as they were wont to do when bound to some ordination or ecclesiastical council. While yet within hearing, one of the riders stopped to pluck a switch. Notice they're lining up the next people in Goodman Brown's life that he thinks are still good. Wonder where this is going. Of the two, Reverend Sir, said the voice like the deacon's, I had rather miss an ordination dinner than tonight's meeting. Tonight's meeting? It's not the church meeting. They tell me that some of our community are to be there from Falmouth and beyond, and others from Connecticut and Rhode Island, besides several of the Indian powwows, who, after their fashion, know almost as much deviltry as the best of us. Moreover, there is a goodly young woman to be taken into communion. All right, so the minister and deacon have just said that they're going to the devil's mass in the woods, as well as that Sunday school teacher. So they're all going there tonight. So yeah, that's got to shake Brown up some more. Mighty well, Deacon Gookin, replied the solemn old tones of the minister. Spur up, or we shall be late. Nothing can be done, you know, until I get on the ground. The hoofs clattered again, and the voices, talking so strangely in the empty air, passed through the forest, where no church had ever been gathered or solitary Christian prayed. Whither then could these holy men be journeying so deep into the heathen wilderness? Young Goodman Brown caught hold of a tree for support, being ready to sink down on the ground, faint and overburdened with the heavy sickness of his heart. He looked up to the sky, doubting whether there was really a heaven above him. Yet there was a blue arch, and the stars brightening in it. With heaven above and faith below, I will yet stand firm against the devil, cried Goodman Brown. So he's struggling with hearing that his preacher and minister are going to the evil mass, but he's still trying to keep the faith. While he still gazed upward into the deep arch of the firmament, and had lifted his hands to pray, a cloud, though no wind was stirring, hurried across the zenith and hid the brightening stars. The blue sky was still visible, except directly overhead, where the black mass of cloud was sweeping swiftly northward. Aloft in the air, as if from the depths of the cloud, came a confused and doubtful sound of voices. Once the listener fancied that he could distinguish the accents of townspeople of his own, men and women, both pious and ungodly, many of whom he had met at the communion table, and had seen others rioting at the tavern. The next moment, so indistinct were their sounds, he doubted whether he had heard aught but the murmur of the old forest, whispering without a wind. Then came a strong swell of those familiar tones heard daily in the sunshine at Salem Village, but never until now, from a cloud of night, there was one voice of a young woman uttering lamentations, yet with an uncertain sorrow and entreating for some favor, which perhaps it would grieve her to obtain, and all the unseen multitude, both saints and sinners, seemed to encourage her onward. So note, people he knows, good and bad, are making voices from a cloud. which probably means they're flying, which probably means they're witches. So they're suggesting that, oh, all the people you know are witches. All of them. I mean, you hear them in the cloud, right? That's, you're fighting a losing battle, mister, with your faith here. May as well come over. Faith, shouted Goodman Brown in a voice of agony and desperation, and the echoes of the forest mocked him, crying, Faith, Faith, as if bewildered wretches were seeking her all through the wilderness. The cry of grief, rage, and terror was yet piercing the night, when the unhappy husband held his breath for a response. There was a scream, drowned immediately in a louder murmur of voices, fading into far-off laughter as the dark clouds swept away, leaving the clear and silent sky above Goodman Brown. But something fluttered lightly down through the air and caught on the branch of a tree. The young man seized it and beheld a pink ribbon. You might recall from the beginning who wore pink ribbons. My faith is gone, cried he, after one stupefied moment. There is no good on earth, and sin is but a name. Come, devil, for to thee is this world given. So finally, after hearing that his Sunday school teacher, his preacher and minister, and his family, and basically, all the townspeople you know are with Satan, he's finally lost his faith, so to speak. His faith is gone, so his faith is gone. His wife is gone, so his religious faith is gone. Shown by what he just said and the ribbons dropping. Of course, this could still just be Satan working on, showing him things that, And maddened with despair, so that he laughed loud and long, did Goodman Brown grasp his staff and set forth again, at such a rate that he seemed to fly along the forest path rather than to walk or run. And of course, if you're flying, you're a witching with Satan. So the road grew wilder and drearier and more faintly traced, and vanished at length, leaving him in the heart of the dark wilderness, still rushing onward with the instinct that guides mortal man to evil. The whole forest was peopled with frightful sounds, the creaking of the trees, the howling of the wild beasts, the yell of the Indians, while sometimes the wind tolled like a distant church bell, and sometimes gave a broad roar around the traveler, as if all nature were laughing him to scorn. But he was himself the chief horror of the scene, and shrank not from its other horrors. Ha ha ha, roared Goodman Brown, when the wind laughed at him. So he's lost his darn mind, I guess, at this point. Definitely lost his faith. He's buddies with Satan now. This walk has not done his faith very much good at all. Let us hear which will laugh loudest. Think not to frighten me with your deviltry. Come witch, come wizard, come Indian powwow, come devil himself, and here comes Goodman Brown. You may as well fear him as he fear you. In truth, all through the haunted forest, there could be nothing more frightful than the figure of Goodman Brown. On he flew among the black pines, brandishing his staff with frenzied gestures, now giving vent to the inspiration of horrid blasphemy, and now shouting forth such laughter as set all the echoes of the forest laughing like demons around him. The fiend of his own shape is less hideous than when he rages in the breast of a man. Thus sped the demoniac on his course until, quivering among the trees, he saw a red light before him, as when the felled trunks and branches of a clearing have been set on fire, and throw up their lurid blaze against the sky at the hour of midnight. He paused in a lull of the tempest that had driven him onward, and heard the swell of what seemed to him, rolling solemnly from the distance with the weight of many voices. He knew the tune. It was a familiar one in the choir of the village meeting house. The verse died heavily away and was lengthened by a chorus, not of human voices, but of all the sounds of the benighted wilderness pealing in awful harmony together. Goodman Brown cried out, and his cry was lost to his own ear by its unison with the cry of the desert. Notice they use the word desert not because he's in a sandy place, but as in this is a deserted place, a wilderness. With the Puritans, they thought of, the town and the church as like the seat of civilization, so the seat of goodness. The wilderness, the wild, was where evil things happened, and evil things lived, and witches have their evil stuff going on. So it's kind of civilization versus wilderness, good versus evil. for their culture. In the interval of silence, he stole forward until the light glared full upon his eyes. At one extremity of an open space, hemmed in by the dark wall of the forest, arose a rock, bearing some rude, unnatural resemblance either to an altar or a pulpit, and surrounded by 4 blazing pines, their tops aflame, their stems untouched, like candles at the evening meeting. The mass of foliage that had overgrown the summit of the rock was all on fire, blazing high into the night and fitfully illuminating the whole field. Each pendant twig and leafy festoon was in a blaze. As the red light arose and fell, a numerous congregation alternately shone forth, then disappeared in shadow, and again, as it were, out of the darkness, peopling the heart of the solitary woods at once. So he's finally come upon the devil's church service in the forest, basically. A grave and dark-clad company, quoth Goodman Brown. In truth they were such. Among them, quivering to and fro between gloom and splendor, appeared faces that would be seen next day at the council board of the province, and others which, Sabbath after Sabbath, looked devoutly heavenward and benignantly over the crowded pews. From the holiest pulpits of the land, some affirmed that the lady of the governor was there. At least there were high dames well known to her, and wives of honored husbands and widows in great multitude, and ancient maidens, all of excellent repute, and fair young girls who trembled lest their mothers should espy them. Either the sudden gleams of light flashing over the obscure field bedazzled Goodman Brown, or he recognized a score of the old church members of Salem village, famous for their especial sanctity. Good old Deacon Gookin, which is still a ridiculous name, had arrived, and waited at the skirts of the venerable saint, his revered pastor, but irreverently consorting with these grave, reputable, and pious people, these elders of the church, these chaste dames and dewy virgins. There were men of dissolute lives and women of spotted fame, wretches given over to all mean and filthy vice, and suspected even of horrid crimes. It was strange to see that the good shrank not from the wicked, nor were the sinners abashed by the saints. Scattered also among the pale-faced enemies were the Indian priests or powwows, who had often scared their native forest with more hideous incantations than any known to English witchcraft. So the situation is really laying it on thick here. The devil's showing him everyone all at once, all the good people he knows, all the bad people he knows, at the evil church service to show him, like, give up hope, give up your faith. What's the point? They're all here anyway. But where is faith, thought Goodman Brown. So he's still looking for faith, even though he's lost his faith, still looking for her. And as hope came into his heart, he trembled. Another verse of the hymn rose, slow and mournful strain, such as the pious love, but joined to words which expressed all that our nature can conceive of sin, and darkly hinted at far more. Unfathomable to mere mortals is the lore of fiends. Verse after verse was sung, and still the chorus of the desert swelled between them, like the deepest tone of a mighty organ. And with the final peal of that dreadful anthem, there came a sound as if roaring wind, the rushing streams, the howling beasts, and every other voice of the unconcerted wilderness were mingled and accorded with the voice of guilty man in homage to the Prince of all. The 4 blazing pines threw up a loftier flame and obscurely discovered shapes and visages of horror on the smoky wreaths above the impious assembly. At the same moment, the fire on the rock shot redly forth and formed a glowing arch above its base, where now appeared a figure. With reverence be it spoken, the figure bore no slight similitude, both in garb and manner, to some grave divine of the New England churches. So apparently they've got another minister of some kind from their churches to hold the evil mass. Bring forth the converts, cried a voice that echoed through the field and rolled into the forest. At the word, Goodman Brown stepped forth from the shadow of the trees and approached the congregation, with whom he felt a loathful brotherhood by the sympathy of all that was wicked in his heart. He could have well nigh sworn that the shape of his own dead father beckoned him to advance, looking downward from a smoke wreath, while a woman with dim features of despair threw out her hand to warn him back. Was it his mother? But he had no power to retreat one step, nor to resist even in thought, when the minister and good old Deacon Gookin seized his arms and led him to the blazing rock. Thither came also the slender form of a veiled female, led between Goody Cloyce, that pious teacher of the catechism, and Martha Carrier, who had received the devil's promise to be the queen of hell. Sure, why not? A rampant hag was she, and there stood the proselytes beneath the canopy of fire. Welcome, my children, said the dark figure, to the communion of your race. You have found thus young your nature and your destiny. My children, look behind you. They turned, and flashing forth, as it were, in a sheet of flame, the fiend worshippers were seen. The smile of welcome gleamed darkly on every visage. There resumed the sable form, are all whom ye have reverenced from youth. Ye deemed them holier than yourselves, and shrank from your own sin, contrasting it with their lives of righteousness and prayerful aspirations heavenward. Yet here they all are, in my worshipping assembly. This night it shall be granted you to know their secret deeds, how hoary-bearded elders, that is, white-bearded elders, of the church, have whispered wanton words to the young maids of their households, how many a woman eager for widow's weeds has given her husband a drink at bedtime and let him sleep his last sleep in their bosom, how beardless youths have made haste to inherit their father's wealth, and how fair damsels, blush not, sweet ones, have dug little graves in the garden, and bidden me the sole guest to an infant's funeral. So he's saying, oh, all you people that you thought were good, they're terrible. Let me tell you how terrible they are, actually. They're all terrible. You might as well join them. That's basically what Satan's doing here. By the sympathy of your human hearts for sin ye shall scent out all the places, whether in church, bedchamber, street, field, or forest, where crime has been committed, and shall exult to behold the whole earth one stain of guilt, one mighty blood spot. Far more than this, it shall be yours to penetrate in every bosom the deep mystery of sin, the fountain of all wicked arts, and which inexhaustibly supplies more evil impulses than human power, than my power at its utmost can make manifest in deeds. And now, my children, look upon each other. They did so, and by the blaze of the hell-kindled torches the wretched man beheld his faith, and the wife, her husband, trembling before the unhallowed altar. So somehow faith is now with him there, though he definitely left her at the house and has figuratively lost his faith. So, yeah, more symbolic, allegorical things to come with him and faith. Lo, there ye stand, my children, said the figure in a deep and solemn tone, almost sad with its despairing awfulness, as if his once angelic nature could yet mourn for our miserable race. Depending upon one another's hearts, ye had still hoped that virtue were not all a dream. Now are ye undeceived. Evil is the nature of mankind. Evil must be your only happiness. Welcome again, my children, to the communion of your race. Just in case they hadn't hit the nail on the head already, they're like, come to evil. Evil's great. It's very blatant here. Welcome, repeated the fiend worshippers in one cry of despair and triumph. And there they stood, the only pair, as it seemed, who were yet hesitating on the verge of wickedness in this dark world. A basin was hollowed naturally in the rock. Did it contain water, reddened by the lurid light, or was it blood, or perchance a liquid flame? Herein did the shape of evil dip his hand, and prepare to lay the mark of baptism upon their foreheads, that they might be partakers of the mystery of sin, more conscious of the secret guilt of others, both in deed and thought, than they could now be of their own. The husband cast one look at his pale wife, and faith at him. What polluted wretches would the next glance show them to each other, shuddering alike at what they disclosed and what they saw. Faith, faith, cried the husband, look up to heaven, resist the wicked one. So while he's walking towards this dark communion here, he's telling his faith to hold on. So on one hand, he's giving into temptation. On the other hand, he's trying to hold strong to his faith. He's very torn, but still going forward. Whether faith obeyed, he knew not. Hardly had he spoken when he found himself amid calm night and solitude, listening to a roar of the wind which died heavily away through the forest. He staggered against the rock and felt it chill and damp, while a hanging twig that had been all on fire besprinkled his cheek with the coldest dew. The next morning, young Goodman Brown came slowly into the street of Salem village, staring around him like a bewildered man. The good old minister was taking a walk along the graveyard to get an appetite for breakfast and meditate on his sermon, and bestowing a blessing as he passed on Goodman Brown. He shrank from the venerable saint as if to avoid an anathema. Old Deacon Gookin was at domestic worship, and the holy words of his prayer were heard through the open window. "What God doth the wizard pray to?" quoth Goodman Brown. Goody Cloyce, the excellent old Christian, stood in the early sunshine at her own lattice, catechizing a little girl who had brought her a pint of morning's milk. Goodman Brown snatched away the child as from the grasp of the fiend himself. Turning the corner by the meeting house, he spied the head of Faith with the pink ribbons, gazing anxiously forth and bursting into such joy at sight of him that she skipped along the street and almost kissed her husband before the whole village. But Goodman Brown looked sternly and sadly into her face and passed on without a greeting. So notice, Goodman Brown here basically believes everything that happened in the forest last night. It might be true, it might not. Satan might have just been showing him a bunch of illusions to get him to come over to the dark side here. Or it might have happened, we can't know. Kind of an unreliable guide. But he definitely believes it happened. Also notice when he greets us by faith, it is not a happy greeting. He is on a very different relationship with his wife now when he comes back from that journey. So his relationship with his religious faith is also much changed, not as positive as it was. Had Goodman Brown fallen asleep in the forest and only dreamed a wild dream of the witch meeting? Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but the effects seem to be the same. Be it so if you will, but alas, it was a dream of evil omen for young Goodman Brown, a stern, sad, darkly meditative, and distrustful, if not a desperate man did he become from the night of that fearful dream. On the Sabbath day, when the congregation were singing a holy psalm, he could not listen because an anthem of sin rushed loudly upon his ear and drowned all the blessed strain. When the minister spoke from the pulpit with power and fervid eloquence, and with his hand on the open Bible of the sacred truths of our religion, and of saint-like lives and triumphant deaths, and of future bliss or misery unutterable, then did Goodman Brown turn pale, dreading lest the roof should thunder down upon the gray blasphemer and his hearers. Often waking suddenly at midnight, he shrank from the bosom of faith, and at morning or eventide, when the family knelt down to prayer, he scowled and muttered to himself and gazed sternly at his wife, and turned away. And when he had lived long and was borne to his grave a hoary corpse, followed by Faith, an aged woman, and children and grandchildren in goodly procession, besides his neighbors not a few, they carved no hopeful verse upon his tombstone, for his dying hour was gloom. Notice here Goodman Brown's journey, literal journey and journey of faith. All he had to do was give into temptation that one night, follow Satan that one night, and boom, there's the rest of his life. It's just no coming back, apparently. You sign your name and boom, you're done. So it's an interesting concept from the Puritans there. Not so much how you live your entire life, but going into the woods and signing Satan's book. So, yeah. But remember to look over your study guide and think about what's happening literally versus symbolically in this allegory. And I'll see you in the next story video. Take care and have a good night.